Now that we got this correct HTML skeleton, as it's also called, this correct HTML structure, let's continue working on our content and on styling this content. And what about this link? This link still has its default style. We can, of course, also apply some styling to that link, and you might be able to guess how that could work. We could add the style attribute here, but I don't really want to do this anymore, for the reasons mentioned before. Instead, we can add a new CSS rule here. We got one for H1 elements, we got one for paragraphs. Now we can add one for anchor elements, simply by using the element name here. And that's always how CSS rules work. When we use this type selector, where we select by HTML element type, we always just repeat the name of the HTML element without those angle brackets. So here, A. And with that, we target all the anchor elements on our page. We can give them a certain look, a certain styling. Now, which styling do we want here? We might want to change the color, and I also want to get rid of that underlining. Not because it's bad, just because I don't want it here. Now let's start with the color, because we learned how that worked. And we learned that we got different ways of defining a color, and it's up to you which approach you prefer, RGB, HSL, or hex codes. And I will stick to RGB here and define a color with the RGB function, as it's actually called. And then here I picked a color in advance, which has a red value of 167, the green value to 1, and the blue value to 78. And that gives me this plum red color here. And if we save this and reload, it might be a bit hard to see, but now I have this more reddish color here. Now, to get rid of the underlining, we can inspect this and see why it has an underlining. And if we inspect this, we see it's probably this line of code here, text decoration underline. This sounds very much like it's responsible for the, well, underline. So if we want to overwrite this with our own style, just as we overrode the color, which is why we have this strike-through effect here for the default color, if we want to override it, we just need to repeat this property and give it a different value. So here we can now also set text decoration and now set this to none to remove the underline effect. And if we do that and reload, the underline is gone, and now we just have this colored text. Now, it would be quite common that links should change their look if we hover over them, though. And currently, that link always looks the same. Now, for this, we need to dig into another CSS feature. We don't just have the type selectors here, we also have so-called pseudo selectors, which allow us to select an element when it has a different state, you could say. And for this, we can add a new rule where we still type A, but then also colon, hover, and then our curly braces. This applies the hover pseudo selector on the anchor element, which means whenever any anchor element on the page is hovered on, so if the mouse is hovering over that element, then we want to apply the styles defined here. And here we could set text decoration to underline, for example, to bring back that underlining, but only if we're hovering over the link. So then the link will still have these styles, but in addition, this style here, if we hover over it. So then we again overwrite the text decoration and set it back to underline if we're hovering over the link. So if we now save this and reload, if I hover over this link, you see it's now underlined. And especially the hover pseudo selector is a super important type of selector which you will use all the time when writing CSS code, because it's very common for links and for buttons that you want to change the styling when the mouse pointer hovers over them. And that's how you can implement this.